I'll click start recording before I forget, and let us take attendance. Cool. We should have 4-day weekends every week, shouldn't we? That was lovely. All right, so for our one lecture of the week, it will be about fallacies, crime, and security. Yay. So let's get on into that. Okay, so the very first thing that I want to talk about is fallacies. It has to do with logic, because we've been learning a lot of that. What does this mean? What does it mean to have an argument with a fallacy in it, right? What does it mean when you have an argument, and how can you explain that it's not correct? That's a bad argument. That it's not logical, all right? It shouldn't have been an argument in the first place. You shouldn't have been allowed to say that, and nobody's allowed to be convinced by it. Fallacies allow us to strike down arguments that are bad. Let's talk about them. So a fallacy, it is just like, I don't know, if an argument is a game, a fallacy is you not playing by the rules. It's like a foul, okay? So, yeah, you make an error during the course of an argument. That's all a fallacy is, okay? There's a bunch of different errors that you can make, and so there's a bunch of different kinds of fallacies. And we say that an argument is fallacious if it has a fallacy in it. And once you find that fallacy, the argument is false. It is not a good argument. You should not agree with it. They should have, even if what they're trying to say, the other person, even if what they're arguing to you is really correct, they picked the wrong argument if there's a fallacy in it, okay? Anytime there's a fallacious argument, it is automatically false. That sentence cannot be trusted, okay? And we'll talk about different examples of that. And these come up all the time. Fallacies happen all the time in real life. Like, people who want to convince you of something will try to convince you in the wrong way. Corporations who want you to buy things will make you think about things in the wrong way. Governments will try and make you do things using the wrong kind of ideas. They all use fallacies to manipulate people. It's a way of manipulation, right? An argument is essentially manipulation. So we need to see through those fallacies and not agree with somebody who's trying to tell us something wrong, okay? The very, very key thing that I want to talk about right now is you can't just, like, I'm going to give you an essay on this eventually. You can't just say, oh, this thing that I found on the internet, it's a fallacy. Every fallacy has a name. I will teach you some of them. You have to point out, okay, once you notice that there is something wrong with this argument, you have to go down the list and figure out which kind of fallacy it is. I'm not going to accept you just saying the word fallacy and moving on. You have to tell me what kind of fallacy it is, okay? Also, some people use the word fallacy just as a synonym for bad argument. That is not what we're going to do in this class, okay? There's specific kinds of fallacies, and we'll talk about those. Fallacy just doesn't mean bad argument. It means a very specific kind of bad argument, okay? Any questions about these terms before we get into different kinds of fallacies? Yes?
So you said there's like a set list of fallacies that we have to go back to and describe. Is there like new fallacies that are being made?
Oh yeah, there's a huge Wikipedia page. I'm only going to show you a few in lecture, but when I give you eventually an essay about this, you can just go on the Wikipedia page and there's hundreds of them. There's a lot of ways that things could go wrong, yeah. So let's get into the first one. Hopefully these should be mostly intuitive, at least the informal kinds that I'm going to talk about here. So this one is called false dilemma, okay? Sometimes also called false dichotomy. Sometimes also called the black and white fallacy. That's where dichotomy is coming into play. Black and white fallacy. The idea is when somebody gives you an argument and it has this fallacy in it, they are only giving you the illusion that there are two possibilities and two possibilities only, when usually there are more than that, okay? So somebody's trying to say you can choose X or you can choose Y. That's all you get, okay? But really, there's a Z sitting around, potentially multiple Zs, other places, okay? That's what it means to have a false dilemma fallacy. So here's an example of a false dilemma fallacy. There are only two kinds of people in the world, people who love Phoebe Bridgers and people who hate music. Unfortunately, that is not true, right? That's trying to put people into boxes, two separate boxes, and there are more than that, right? I hope that makes enough sense. Another example that I stole from the internet, Stacy spoke out against socialism, so she must be a fascist. No, there's a whole spectrum of political views, right? It's not X or Y, it's not black or white. That is a false dilemma fallacy. Do we see why it's wrong? It's trying to imply that there are only a few options when really there's more than that. And so you can't trust somebody who's trying to tell you these things. It's automatically an incorrect argument. Okay? Any questions about this one? I just have a list that I'm going to go through. Plenty to talk about. So, yeah, if we're good with this one, that is false dilemma. Here's another one. I think that one's from some sort of political thing. That comes up all the time in politics, right? The next one is ad populum. Yay for Latin. So this is also called the bandwagon fallacy. It is Latin for populum, like populace, population. It is Latin for to the populace, to the popularity, or to the people. That word has a lot of meanings in Latin. So here's what happens when you make this kind of fallacy. You are saying that something is good or true just because other people agree with it. That's what it means. It's popular. Okay, it's a popular thing, and therefore it's true, it's good, it's awesome. Okay, just because other people agree with it. Maybe I can underline that. And so here is like the populace, the population. A bunch of people are like really into thing X. Here's all the people who love it, and then the ad populum fallacy is therefore noticing all these people who love this thing X and concluding that X must be good. Okay? Do we see why this is a fallacy? Hopefully, right? It doesn't have to, like, all these people could be wrong, right? All of these people could totally be wrong about this idea. It doesn't have to be good at all. Okay? So advertisements are a great example of this, yeah?
What about like what if this was like a doctor? But it's like done like even just someone who's like research on something, would this apply to them too? Like you take their word for it? Like somebody who's like obviously certified to like have an opinion about it.
I think there's some more hidden meaning behind that. Yeah, I don't think that would be a fallacy at that point because it's science and you have real facts behind why you're believing something.
Okay, yeah.
This is more like opinions. Yes? That's also quite true, yeah. People could have the wrong idea even if they have a PhD in something.
Or they have like over prescription use of certain things that may not be needed.
Exactly, yeah, because they're getting kickbacks from giving out those prescriptions. Yeah, this is why we're taking this class. You can't even trust a doctor these days, can you? Yeah, these are good comments. Keep them coming. So the most often, the place where you will see these kinds of fallacies most often is advertisements, like a Gatorade commercial. Drink Gatorade because that's what all the professional athletes are using to stay hydrated because they're giving it out to them so that you're now interested in buying it, right? Maybe something's horribly wrong with Gatorade. We could just make our own, right? Drink water. Put some salt in the water. So, yeah, that is an ad populum fallacy. Don't do something just because other people are doing, right? It's not a good argument. Other things like, okay, Jimi Hendrix, he loved to play with Fender Stratocasters, and therefore I need one. Everybody needs one who plays a guitar. Though I might think this, it is not true, yeah? You can play with whatever kind of guitar you want. And another one that comes up a lot is like, my parents believe this thing, and so that's what I believe too. That's not a good reason, right? Things can go badly with that. So that's the ad populum fallacy. It's also called the bandwagon fallacy. So don't get on the bandwagon with a bunch of other people believing this thing when it may just not be true. All of these people could be wrong, okay? So that's ad populum. Anytime somebody uses it, it's a bad argument. Let's move on now to circular reasoning. This one's actually surprisingly subtle. So it's easy to explain, though. Circular reasoning is when you have, like, you're thinking about something, you're trying to prove something, and in concluding that something is true, you also assume that it was true first. So you repeat your assumption in your argument as your conclusion of your argument. Maybe you rephrase it so it doesn't sound exactly the same, but that's what happens. Okay? It sounds like it should be very easy to notice this, but it's really not, surprisingly. So the structure of a circular reasoning argument is somebody makes the assumption, like they get you to believe that, or assume, let's say, they assume thing X is good, and then they come around and then they prove to you, they say something like, therefore, X is good. There was no argument involved, right? You're just being tricked. So do we see the error here? That makes no sense. You gave no real reason why this thing X is good. You just assumed that it was and proved using that assumption that it was good. Okay? It's also called begging the question. And here are the best examples that I could find on the internet. Things like, opium induces sleep because it has a soporific quality. If you know what this term means, it just means causing sleep, right? It causes sleep because it causes sleep. Right? So people can hide behind fancy large words and not really say anything. Okay? That's the idea of circular reasoning. Or everyone wants to buy Phoebe Bridgers' new album because it's the hottest album this season. It's popular because it's popular. That's not saying anything. It's not giving a reason, right? That's not an argument. Not even an argument in that case. Okay? Usually it's hiding behind flowery words. So I found this very long paragraph or this very long sentence on the internet as well that has to do with circular reasoning. Try and take like a minute to read this because it's a long one and see if you can notice yourself, and then we'll talk about it. See if you can notice why it's just assuming something and then repeating that assumption. See if you can notice where it happens. All right, so a lot of big words there, right? Let's go through it. To allow every man an unbounded freedom of speech must always be on the whole advantageous to the state. So this is pro freedom of speech. We must have freedom of speech must always be advantageous. It's a good thing. For it is highly conducive to the interests of the community that each individual should enjoy a liberty perfectly unlimited of expressing his sentiments. So people, it's advantageous to have freedom of speech because everybody should have freedom of speech. Everybody should have freedom of speech, and it's a good thing because everyone should have freedom of speech. You see that? So this very long sentence is actually saying nothing at all. I'm sure you've seen this a lot on the internet in comments or things. So just notice it now. It's called circular reasoning. Nobody's making an argument anyway, really. Okay? So don't trust these people. Any questions about this one? It is very subtle. So this is one of the harder ones to find. But now you know its name at least. All right, are we ready for a more logical fallacy now? This one is more about like actual logical rules that we learned about in truth tables and things. It's easier at least to explain using truth tables and things. So this is called a formal fallacy and has to really do with logic. The ones that I've just been telling you about are more informal fallacies, we say. Okay? Can't really draw a truth table about them. But this one you can. It's called denying the antecedent. So here is the way that this argument takes place, and then I'll prove to you why it's wrong. Okay? So somebody makes the assumption that if P is true, then Q is true. So if I have this, then I have this. So you assume that, and then you go and you prove, you conclude that, okay, if not P is true, if I don't have P, then I don't have Q. Okay? Does everybody understand this kind of idea? At least it's assume this, assume if P then Q, if P happens then Q happens, and then you try and prove, you make the argument that, okay, if P doesn't happen then Q doesn't happen. It seems kind of logical, at least in letter form, but it's actually incorrect. This is not a correct conclusion from this assumption. And this will make sense with a real example with words, I think. Okay, so here is an argument. It has two assumptions and then a conclusion. So here's what's happening. Here's the assumption, and here's the P implies Q, and here's the not P, and here's the not Q. And let's see why it's wrong. So if you are a ski instructor, assume this. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. Okay? So we're assuming this. We're also assuming this. And then we're concluding this. So if you are a ski instructor, let's make you are a ski instructor be the P. Then you have a job. That can be our Q. Okay? So if P, then Q. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. Yeah? And here is our next assumption. You are not a ski instructor. Yeah? So that is, in terms of P, that is the negation of P. That is not P. We're assuming that not P is true. And then we're trying to conclude, it's correct to try and move that not P up. That's fine. So assume not P. And then they're concluding that, oh, therefore you have no job. Do you see how that's not Q? That's the negation of this. And this is a completely horrible argument, right? It's an incorrect argument. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. But if you're not a ski instructor, that means you don't have a job. So there are more jobs than just ski instructor. Yes? This is an incorrect argument. It is a fallacy, even though, like, in words, it kind of makes sense. Like, okay, if this is true, then this is true. Maybe that means if the first thing wasn't true, then the second thing wasn't true. But that is not the case. Okay? So, any questions about this one? Hopefully that English example made it make more sense. So this is a logical fallacy, a formal fallacy. Are we ready for the next one? All right. So let's try this one. This one is called tu quoque, another Latin term. So this one is Latin for you too. You also. And it's also called the appeal to hypocrisy. So this is a fun one. Instead of making an argument, this one distracts from the argument by pointing out that the other person is a hypocrite. Crazy. It's deflecting blame, even though that blame was probably correct. You were correct to blame this other person. Okay? So the reason that this doesn't work, the reason you can't just, like, when somebody calls you out for something, you can't just say, oh, you did that thing too. You can be a hypocrite and still be right. Okay? Let me just point that out. You can be, neither of you should have done the thing, right? You can be a hypocrite and still be right. And this comes up all the time in politics, okay? So, for example, let's just say that the U.S. is criticizing Russia for something, and then Russia responds back by saying, oh, U.S., you did that same thing a while ago. You too, sorry. And so it's deflecting blame. Does that idea make sense? Even though neither of the countries should have done that thing, it was still an okay thing to say, right? Tu quoque, it's kind of deflecting blame. Saying that somebody else did that thing too, it's not a good argument. It doesn't get you out of being wrong or doing it in the first place, okay? Another example, I stole this recently. China has some like re-education detention camps for their Muslim citizens that they send to sometimes. And then China called us out because we called them out on it. They said, like, oh, you do that too. You have Guantanamo Bay, right? So that is not a good argument. That doesn't get China out of being wrong. Both of us are wrong, right? That's the idea. Any questions about that? So you can be a hypocrite and still be right. That's the reason why tu quoque does not make sense. All right. Are we good to move on to the next one? We just have a bunch of examples of these. They're kind of fun to notice, like what's wrong, right? I hope. This one is a weirder one. It doesn't come up as often, but it is part of the list that I'm required to teach you. So it's called the genetic fallacy. And this is when you have an argument, you're arguing something based on the history of that thing, which is very vague. I'll get into an example, don't worry. And or the origin of that thing that you're arguing about, that bases your argument is based around that, when that information is no longer relevant. Okay, so it's when you're arguing about something by talking about the past, when the past is no longer relevant. So here is another long paragraph that I stole from the internet talking about wedding rings. I don't actually know if this is true. Maybe we can look it up on Wikipedia. But here's the argument. You're not going to wear a wedding ring, are you? Don't you know that the wedding ring originally symbolized ankle chains worn by women to prevent them from running away from their husbands? I would not have thought you would be a party to such a sexist practice. So this is an incorrect argument against wedding rings, because even if they really did symbolize this back in the day, I don't know if this is true. I did just take it from the internet without doing any research. But even if it's true, I think we can all agree that wedding rings don't symbolize that at all anymore. Right? They have taken on a completely new meaning. The past is no longer relevant, assuming this is a correct past. Does that make sense? So you're appealing to the past, something went wrong in the past about this thing, when it doesn't really matter anymore. Okay? So this is a weirder one. Another example that I stole from the internet. So this news story about the Purple Party candidate must be fake, since it was made by XYZ News. That station is owned by someone who is against the Purple Party. And you might actually believe this if somebody said it to you, if I didn't tell you it was a genetic fallacy, right? The reason why you may be able to trust this story, even though it was owned by, even though the station was owned by somebody who hates the Purple Party, is because maybe the Purple Party really did, or maybe this candidate really did something wrong, and everybody knows about it, right? Just because they're reporting something doesn't mean that it's automatically fake, okay? Even if the person who owns the station has an agenda, right? Maybe something is just out in the open, and they noticed it, and they're reporting on it, right? The origin of where this truth is coming from, right? This is why it's a genetic fallacy. Origins have no impact on truth. Maybe if you don't trust the station, you go and change the station and see if they're also reporting that on some unbiased news source. Then you can trust, okay, they were actually saying the right thing. So maybe you have to do more research, but it doesn't automatically mean that the story was fake. Does that make sense? So that's the genetic fallacy. You're talking about the past or the origin of something, where the story is coming from, the history of a wedding ring, when it doesn't matter. Okay? Has no impact on the truth. All right, I have 2 more, and those are more fun ones. Those come up a lot. Are we ready for them? Any last questions about this one? Let me get some water. All right, so this one you might have heard before, actually. Happens a lot on the internet. It's called the straw man fallacy. We heard that word before, maybe? So this happens a ton, and the fallacy occurs when you are arguing and you're attacking a position that your opponent doesn't actually hold. You make it sound like they do hold that opinion or that position, but they don't really. you're kind of weakening their argument, right? You're turning their argument into another one that's made of straw that you can kick down very, very easily, even though that's not really what they're talking about, okay? So the standard in like everyday speech, the way to describe a straw man fallacy is that you're putting words in someone's mouth. Someone's mouth. Words that they don't agree with, right? You're weakening their argument when it's not correct to do that, okay? So here are some more stolen internet examples. This is a closing argument from a lawyer from a bank robbery case. Let's pretend that this is all happening. So this lawyer is saying, I submit to you that if you can't take this evidence and find these defendants guilty, then we might as well open all the banks and say, come on and get the money, boys, because we'll never be able to convict them. So this person's saying, like, if we don't find these defendants guilty, then nobody else in the future will ever be, what's the word in law? Nobody else will ever be convicted if they robbed a bank. So we're setting the wrong kind of precedent here. That's what the person is trying to say. When obviously that's not true at all, right? Maybe this particular bank robbery case has some very vague, pieces of information that don't really prove that those robbers were really there. Like, maybe they're not robbers after all. But this person is trying to say, oh, we better, if we don't think that they're guilty, then nobody else in the future is ever going to be convicted. And obviously, I think the other lawyer is not trying to say that at all, right? We're just talking about these particular bank robbers. This person is putting words in the mouth of the defense, right? Something like that. I don't know my law terms, but that's the first example. You're putting words in somebody's mouth. You're saying something that somebody else doesn't really believe. And I think this is the better example. I stole this one too. So person A says, the children's winter concert at the school should include non-Christmas songs too. Okay? So that's the argument of person A. And then person B fights back at person A and's like, you won't be happy until Christmas songs are banned from being played on the radio. Obviously, that has nothing to do with what person A just said, right? That's why it's a straw man fallacy. Person B is putting words in person A's mouth. They're not trying to say anything about banning Christmas songs. They're just trying to include some other non-Christmas songs. Maybe they really like that one Coldplay song and they want to hear it. Something like that. They're not. It's a huge jump to go and say that person A hates Christmas songs in general, right? That's not what they were saying. That's a straw man argument. Somebody's trying to attack a position that you don't really hold. Any questions about this one? And this happens a lot on the internet in comments, right? People don't fully understand what the other person is arguing about. And so they're trying to beat down an argument that is very easy to beat down, but it wasn't the other person's argument. Okay? That's straw man fallacy. Can't trust it. And then the final one, probably the most common one, at least on the internet, is called ad hominem. If we haven't heard the word before, we have heard arguments like this. Okay? So this is Latin for, all these are Latin, of course, Latin for to the man or to the person. Okay? So instead of attacking the argument, you're attacking the person who's giving the argument. And this is obviously not correct, right? So attacking the arguer instead of the argument, you're insulting somebody to support your conclusion that they are wrong, right? So that's just incorrect. Something like this. Here are a few examples. It's like you make an argument and then somebody says, no, you're wrong because you suck, right? That's not a correct counter argument, okay? Example quotes. Jones likes a football team from the East Coast. Clearly, he's unfit to be a police chief in California. How do you make that jump, right? You're talking about a person's football team preferences and using that to conclude that they will be a bad police chief, right? You're attacking the arguer instead of the real argument, like why should this person not be a police chief, right? Something like that. This one is a bit more fuzzy, but it is, again, an ad hominem argument, and it should not be immediately trusted, right? You cheated and lied to your wife, but you expect the jury to believe you now. That is ad hominem, right? It's talking about what a person did in a previous case, right? Sometime before about something completely different. This person is not very trustworthy back then, and now they're maybe on trial for something completely different, and this is an argument. You see that? You see how it's ad hominem? You're attacking the person rather than trying to prove that they really did this thing you're trying them for. Yeah? This is ad hominem, but if you were on the jury, would you believe that? You might take that into consideration. And I'm here to tell you that it is incorrect to do that. You have to consider more than just this sentence. Okay? So, yeah, this is why it's very subtle. This is why we're learning about it. And then a standard argument that you may have heard before is you are just too young to understand. You're trying to, like somebody else's, or your parent is saying something like, this needs to happen, this is true, and if you fight back and say, no, I don't think so, they'll say, you're too young to understand, even if maybe you had a good argument. Right? They're attacking you rather than your argument. Okay? So ad hominem, very easy to find, just people yelling at each other on the internet, not really talking about arguments. That is the idea. Okay? So, yeah. This one, especially, like maybe the case had nothing to do with this. Yay. All right. So I have given you a bunch of fallacies. Are you ready to try your hand and see if you can discover what fallacies apply to some examples? All right. I have 2 examples for us to try. Let me go to the Byclicker page, and I'll give you some time to then, as a group, get together and choose the answer that you think applies best to the fallacy in this tweet. And it looks like I forgot to do some of that. Okay, so here's the tweet. Read the tweet. See what kind of fallacy existed in that tweet. So take a couple minutes to try that. And discuss amongst each other, definitely. And if you forgot what one of these was, just yell at me and I'll give you a quick definition of it. All right, take like 10 more seconds to get your answer in on the website, and then we'll see what we're thinking. Where would you rather like to see your meat come from? A chemical factory on an industrial estate or a green field in the middle of the countryside? Yay! We are very confident about saying D. All right. Very nice. So why is it D? Somebody picked it. What gave it away? That is correct. Yeah. So here's like choice 1. Your meat comes from a chemical factory, or your meat comes from a green field. I think we have driven around Fresno County enough to know that there are also brown fields with cows. Right? You have more than just 2 options. So it is D, false dilemma. Any questions about that? We got that one pretty easily. Good. It was giving 2 options, but really there are more. There are plenty more than just that. There's also, like, maybe nobody should have meat at all, right? That is another option. Okay, one more. Here is, let's say that this is the argument. This sentence is the argument, and this is a Facebook comment that I stole from the internet, and that is the counter argument. So there is something wrong with the comment, okay? Trying to bash down this argument. So on the news, President Biden said in his speech, "Get your shot today. There is no time to waste. Nationwide, cases are still rising, especially among the unvaccinated." And this person whose name I'm hiding on Facebook commented, "BS, even the vaccinated are getting COVID." Okay, so what is wrong with that argument? Boop. So give that one a try. Discuss it. I hear some good conversations. Countering this argument. Give me another minute to think about it. All right, hopefully that was enough time to discuss. I hear the voice is dying down, so take like 10 more seconds to get your answer in if you haven't already. And then we will discuss. This one might be a bit more subtle to notice. We'll see. I think it was last semester at least. All right, so get your shot today. There's no time to waste. Nationwide, cases are rising, especially among the unvaccinated. BS, man, even the vaccinated are getting COVID. Why should I agree with that? All right. So we seem to be with a, is it a majority? Almost just shy of a majority, thinking C. Okay, the next most popular one is B. C is in fact what I would say too. If you pick that one, That is also what I would say. And here's why. So, even the vaccinated are getting COVID. This is supposed to be a counter argument saying that, okay, there's no reason for me to get a vaccination. Who cares? Cases are still rising, right? So was President Biden saying anywhere in this sentence that getting the vaccination would keep you from getting COVID? No, he didn't say that at all. So this is not correctly arguing against that, right? He's putting words in the president's mouth. Do we see that? That's the standard way of noticing that it's a straw man argument. So even the vaccinated are getting COVID, but they're getting a much milder form of COVID, right, on average. So that is why you should get vaccinated. Cases are still rising, especially among the unvaccinated. Even if you're vaccinated, it doesn't matter. This person is trying to say even the vaccinated are getting COVID, so their cases are rising too. But we weren't talking about that. Okay? Trying to argue about something that was not being talked about. Hopefully that makes enough sense. Any questions about that? So the next most popular one was B, and it's not really too quoque because there's not anything to really say about that, right? This argument is saying cases are rising. Like a too quoque would be like, your cases are rising too? I don't know. I could kind of see it actually, like the unvaccinated cases are rising too, something like that. I could see that as well. So yeah, I think the strongest one is straw man in my mind, but I could see too quoque now that we think about it. Yeah, you could argue a lot of these, right? As long as you give me a good argument in the essay that I will eventually ask you to write, and I'm happy. Okay? Any other questions about this one? Yeah. So, I like it. We are now going to switch to something completely different in the remaining time. So I want to talk about crime and security. We'll talk about hacking just briefly, because why not? Go back to the computer science part of this class. So let's talk about, in the remaining time, what bad stuff has happened thanks to technology. Like, technology is supposed to be all good. What bad stuff has happened? And how in the world can we be secure on the internet and not have all of our bank accounts get stolen and all of our computers to get viruses and hacked, right? So let's talk about hacking in general. Because back in the day, hacking did not mean something bad. It meant a good thing, right? It just meant that somebody who was a hacker was really good with computers, right? Had nothing to do with, it did not have a bad connotation at the time. And people still use the word hack, computer scientists still use the word hack when they want to talk about, oh, I just did something quick and dirty and it worked, right? It still doesn't have to be a negative term completely. Oh, man, this website that I made for you guys was complete hack. It's the code looks really ugly, but it works. Something like that, okay? So it used to be a positive term, but now it means really bad things. And the reason is people who are good with computers and also not really happy about following the law, they started to cause some real damage once computers started becoming interconnected, right? You could now have a phone line connecting to some large server somewhere, and you can mess with that thing, okay? So I guess the original hacking is, I guess it depends on who you ask, but the original hackers were people called phone phreakers. And what they did was, do we remember, I don't know, man. Have you guys all been exposed to payphones? Do we know what those are still? Okay, good. So payphone is like a box, right? A box with a phone in it. And it's a phone that looks like a real original phone too. And this was connected to a phone line, and you would put money into it, right? And that money would make a sound to where this is connected, the AT&T box that it was connected to, and that sound would convince the box that you paid it money, right? And so you could talk for longer because you had to put like a quarter in every few minutes, something like that. So phone phreakers, they made a device that faked that sound of you putting a coin in. And then you just played it, and it still went to the AT&T box and made it think that you put money in. And so you could fake the idea of money being dropped into the payphone, and now you could talk for longer with your friends for free. Okay? So that was like original hackers, and this really wasn't causing much of a problem. Like AT&T was losing a bit of money maybe, but nobody was like losing their livelihood, right? So mostly innocuous at the time. Those were like the original hackers. Nowadays, once computers started getting into the mix, like connected between the phone lines, we now have worms and viruses. Oh my! So let's talk about those. A virus. I think we have heard this term before at least, but maybe we haven't heard it like precisely defined. A virus is just a bad program, a malicious program that somebody is downloading, right? It needs to be downloaded first. Like somebody sends you a shady email and you double clicked on the attachment in that email, that is on you, right? So it needs to be downloaded and activated. So like you double clicked it and you shouldn't have, something like that. So that's a virus, just some kind of malicious program. And that is separate from this thing called a worm that you may have also heard of. A worm is a malicious program also, but this one doesn't have to be double clicked on. This one is capable of self-activation. It can double click itself. And self-replication. It can email itself to all the people under your company's email address. Like everybody in your address book. And now they'll double click on it. Things like that. Okay, so that's a worm. That's the main difference. Self-replication. And yeah, once we had the internet, these things spread very quickly and there wasn't a lot of security in place. And so bad things happened and people really didn't like the term hacker anymore. Okay? Nowadays even, people, like, you can be a hacker as a day job. Companies hire hackers to test whether their software is susceptible, that's the word, susceptible to, like, getting a virus, things like that. Okay? And because everybody's interconnected, you can steal a lot of stuff. You can steal financial stuff, you can steal personal information, makes it easier to impersonate somebody. And so that's why it's a bad term nowadays. Okay? That's a little bit of history. Let's talk about some prime examples of things that went wrong because we connected computers together. Okay? One is called Stuxnet. This is an interesting one. This is a worm. It is a very sophisticated worm. It only targets very specific computers, and it replicates, and it does weird things. Okay? What this Stuxnet worm did was it replicated, it noticed, and it only activated itself once it figured out that it was living inside of a computer that was the control system for super duper heavy machinery that had to do with nuclear power. This is weird. This is very fancy. So it only ever infected very specific computers, and what it ended up doing was damaging equipment. It made that control system send weird controls, and that ended up damaging the things that it was trying to control. So it damaged equipment in a uranium enrichment plant in Iran back in 2008. And the rumor is that this is so sophisticated that it must have been made by a government. So people think that it was made by the US and Israel together, trying to make it so that Iran was not, like, quickly becoming a nuclear power. And that's the rumor. So that was a very complicated worm, a good example of it. Maybe you heard about this back in the day. All right. So any questions about this one? I just have a couple more examples. All right, let's continue. Let's talk about the Target breach of 2013. Maybe we do remember this one. So here's what happened for this one. Some company was working for Target. It was called Fazio Mechanical, and they were a business that, like, worked on their HVAC machines, their heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration machines for Target, because they need those. So this company wasn't even affiliated with Target. They were just like a contractor that were working on Target systems. And they would get login credentials to the Target system so that they could work on them, right? because they were working for them. And it was this company, right, that got hacked. So first of all, this breach was caused by somebody other than Target getting hacked. Wasn't actually Target that got hacked. At least originally, because they used their hacking of this company to hack Target. Isn't that funny? So how did this company get hacked, you might ask? They used what was called phishing. Have we heard of that term before, with a PH? This is when you impersonate something. You pretend to be your bank's website or something like that so that somebody logs into you. This is when you attempt to obtain sensitive information by pretending to be somebody else. And so they made these people think that they were logging into Target, but really they were logging into some malicious person's website. And so the person at this Fazio Mechanical company who was working for Target got sent a phishing email, clicked on the link, installed a virus, and that virus was really good at stealing usernames and passwords. Okay? That's what it did. And then the second this person went to Target, it started, he gave the virus to them, and it started stealing Target's usernames and passwords and database credentials, of course. And so hackers ended up getting access to all of the credit card data of people buying stuff at Target. Isn't that cool? So, that caused a lot of issues, and banks had to reissue a bunch of credit cards because those were now being used fraudulently because everybody stole the number. It cost about $200 million to fix all these issues, on top of all the credit card fraud that you had to then reverse. So that was a very, very unfortunate effect of linking computers together. Any questions about this? And this is why we're all forced to do cybersecurity training when you get a job. We have to do it as teachers every year, I think, or every couple years. All right, let's talk about some kind of good things, but things that can still be hacked, like biometrics. My phone lets me log in with my face. Other iPhones let you log in with your fingerprint. This is pretty common these days, right? Because biological features are unique. Your fingerprint is not the same as somebody else's, so let's just use that as a key to something to get in, because we're never going to lose our finger, most likely, right? That's useful. We don't have to carry something separately. And this is used where there's a lot of security, right? People trying to get into airports who work there, and it all needs to be super secure. So biometrics, stuff about your body, bio, including fingerprints. You can get extra fancy. You can have eye scanners, so iris shapes are also unique to people. There's a lot of things we could talk about here. But I'm sure you've heard at least a few examples of people making copies of fingerprints. That's not too hard to do. Biometrics, they can be fooled, but it's pretty hard to do it. So it takes some very sophisticated processes to make it all work. And so there's a cat and mouse game going on right now between the people who are trying to make the biometric systems and the people who are trying to break them. They get more and more powerful every day. Okay, so that's biometrics. Can be broken, unfortunately. Any questions about that? So I have just a couple more examples now. And then we'll have a debate. Yay. All right. Next example. We actually talked about this one before when we talked about encryption. But this is called TLS. Stands for Transport Layer Security. This is all over the internet these days. So when you go to a website, HTTPS, that S stands for secure HTTP, colon, / like Amazon or something. Once you go somewhere, you are using transport layer security, and it's encrypting your internet traffic, okay? It uses cryptography, including potentially RSA, which we discovered last time. Doesn't have to be RSA, though, to make sure that the website you're trying to connect to is the only person who can see the information that you're sending to it, like your password, right? You have to send your password to the website to log in. And we want to make sure that nobody else who is listening in on the pipes of the internet, they can read that password, right? So here's the idea. Here's you. Here's like Amazon. We have our own little laptop or computer or whatever. Here's my best drawing of that. And we are connecting to the big fat servers on Amazon's, wherever Amazon's data center is that's closest to us. And we're connecting over the pipes of the internet using TLS. And so all the information that we're sending, somebody could look at it. Like Comcast could look at it if we're sending that through their pipes. Somebody else down here could totally see it. But because we're using encryption, like a public or private key, pub/private key, we're making it so that only Amazon can read that information, can decrypt it. And also when they want to send us stuff, they also have a public and private key. Isn't that neat? So like the class website, let's see what we're using. Connection secure, more information. It looks like we are using, dun dun dun. Let's look at the certificate. Dun dun dun. So yeah, this website, our class website, has a public key. It's using RSA to encrypt that public, all the information that we're trying to send. And yeah, that's how it's working. That's how we're exchanging keys, and then we start sending information to each other in a certain way that doesn't look like it's on here. But yeah, we're using RSA deep down right now. Isn't that neat? And then it looks like we're using AES, which is another kind of encryption that's faster than RSA once we've exchanged some big key. So that's fun to look at. So yeah, anything with HTTPS, it's using TLS, and it's very hard to crack with big enough keys. Okay? So that's that. Any questions about it? We use this all the time. Pretty much every website these days is at HTTPS. Browsers like to complain nowadays if they're not. Finally, this is very, very applicable to this previous slide. When you encrypt things, it's hard for anybody to get in. Governments don't like that, okay? So they sometimes ask for a backdoor to the pipes of the internet, to Facebook, to things like that, right? Just so that they can enforce the laws and make sure that nobody's breaking them, okay? So law enforcement agencies, they really don't like when things are unbreakably encrypted, like using RSA, which is pretty unbreakable. And here are some examples in favor of that. Like back in the day, there was a murder investigation, and the FBI had to wait. They were stalled for a while because they couldn't unlock an iPhone. They couldn't break that. There was no backdoor implemented by Apple at the time, and they were just doing a bad job at trying to try all the possibilities of the login key, right? So this is why they want a backdoor. Yes? And then a lot of countries, governments, they ask companies who are based there to include those backdoors for them into their software and systems. And this is how we got the whole, Edward Snowden stuff. All these companies, they complied, right? These backdoors are ways to break encryption. And there are a bunch of different arguments for and against. I'd like you to think of them. So in a little bit of the remaining time, let's take like 5 minutes to, let's get into our peer instruction groups and have a little debate. So if you're we're going to debate whether companies should be required to include backdoors into their software or their systems so that somebody in law enforcement can access them, okay? So if you are an odd group, let's say that you agree with this. Yes, companies should include backdoors, and try and think of 2 good arguments why. If you're an even group, you are against this practice. You don't think that there should be any backdoors in any of these systems, even for law enforcement, and try and also come up with 2 good arguments for your case. And please write them down on our handy-dandy written ICE page, which I will now go and clear out. So yeah, let's have a text-based debate, as we like to do. And let's come up with some good arguments. And that will mostly be it for the day. So take a few minutes to talk and discuss, and write down your ideas, please. Remember, I'm forcing you to think a certain way. All right, take 30 more seconds to get something in there. That's when my timer expires. All right. Let us come back and see what we're thinking. And that will be mostly it for the day. All right. Do any groups think they came up with something really nice that they'd like to share? Or are we all very shy and we'd like me to randomly pick groups to talk about things? In the back, is that a hand? Yeah. To be tracked. Mm-hmm. Good. Exactly. Very easy to, like, this is very pro law enforcement. That's exactly right. That's the right argument in that case. Very nice. Yeah, it would really help because, like, everybody's lives are digital these days. We could track people who we think are bad, right? We'd only unlock their phones, and then we could follow them and make it very easy to arrest them if need be, things like that. Yeah, great argument for backdoors. Any group would like to share their argument against backdoors? Or shall I find a random even-numbered group? Let's do group 14. Why not? Yeah, privacy is a big deal. So this is an argument against backdoors, right? We should not have backdoors because those infringe on our right to privacy. Good. That's a breach of the Constitution. We shouldn't do that. It's also up to a company, which is privately owned, to allow such a thing to happen, even if it were allowed. Yeah, so it should be maybe on a case-by-case basis. It shouldn't be across the board. That's a good argument. What does Group 20 think? Yeah, again, privacy is a basic right. That's the CSCI argument for it's an infringement on your privacy to have a backdoor. Yeah. Yes, it leaves citizens with the opportunity of being taken advantage of. So if there's a bad person at this law enforcement agency, they can look you up. Should somebody have that kind of power? Okay, so that's a good argument. Against, let's see, a random odd group one more time. Yeah, it would help the law enforcement agencies if we had these things. Prevent certain crimes from happening. Yeah, very good. We could follow somebody because, like, all of our phones are connected to either Wi-Fi, which can be tracked to a location, or cell towers, which can also be triangulated to a location. Or we could just use the GPS in most phones as well. So, yeah, you could follow somebody and stop them before they even commit a crime, maybe. So these are great ideas. And so thank you for humoring me, and I have forced you to think a certain way, even if you don't think that way. Any last comments about this debate that we just had? Yes?
Would it be similar to like a search warrant, but like digitally?
That would be a good method. I'm not really sure, like, when there are backdoors, like, what's going on. I haven't looked into that very, very much, but that seems like it would be the right way to do it if we did it, I would say. Yeah. Make it so that you can't just access everybody's information. But, like, nowadays, even if, like, you're a programmer at Facebook, you're allowed to, most of those people have access to the entire Facebook database. They can look up things. Should we even be giving them that information? Who knows? So let's ask our boys before we leave, is this a good idea? What might they think? So if we asked Kant about backdoors, he would then, like, frame the question with the word always, right? He would say, okay, should we always give things to law enforcement when they need it? And I think this really could go either way. Kant was really a big proponent of individual rights, so maybe he's like, no, we should not do that because that infringes on privacy. That is individual rights. Not a good thing. On the other hand, like, isn't this maybe, like, law enforcement needs this stuff and we should always trust law enforcement. Therefore, we should let them have this information if they think it's necessary. I think Kant could go either way for this one. And then Mill usually can also go either way. You have to weigh the arguments for with the arguments against. So here's the best argument for that I could think of, like, what is the utility in having a backdoor? Well, okay, it will help convict criminals because then we'll have more information about them, for example. But on the flip side, right, you can have an argument against just as easily. Usually the idea is about privacy, right? This is private data. Privacy should be respected, protected. Nobody should get to see the private data that I have created unless I explicitly give them that permission. Yeah? Doesn't matter that I have nothing to hide, things like that. Okay, so that is how I think our philosophers might talk about these topics. And that is, I think, everything that I wanted to say. Any last comments or questions about this stuff? A lot of new topics today. All right, if not, that is all I have for you. So you can leave 3 whole minutes early.